This video contains information intended to educate firefighters on the hazards and features of compressed natural gas-powered vehicles. The presenter and producer cannot anticipate every situation that may be encountered, so it is for informational purposes only. Departments are encouraged to develop standard operating procedures to guide responses to emergencies involving these vehicles. These departmental SOPs should always guide responses to emergencies. While all information contained herein is believed to be accurate, the presenters and producers are not responsible for any adverse outcomes resulting from the use of the information in this video.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. My name is Darren Mooney. I'm Division Chief of Emergency Medical Services here at Green Township. And this morning we are very fortunate to have two subject matter experts here with us today. Obviously, training is the number two thing that we do in our industry, whether it's, we have some police officers here and firefighters here. Training is the second most important thing that we do. And when we are ever considering our training bureau, and the chief officers are considering who we're going to bring in, who we're going to invest a day into, and I don't mean monetarily, I just mean our time, because our time is obviously critical. Who we're going to invest into, I ask two questions always. Is the training quality, and is the training relevant? Well, I will tell you, today's training is check both those marks. These guys today are going to give a very quality training, and it's going to be very relevant to what we do. We have Larry Stone with us. Larry has a long career in public safety. He has most recently transitioned over to a role where he's helping folks recover after a disaster with property damage with Ram Restorations, who is sponsoring the event for us today. But also Larry has spent a career of helping to train firefighters to respond to a very specific type of event, that being compressed natural gas vehicle fires. And Larry has recently, with recent events, traveled the country talking to firefighters about this very important subject. We also have Battalion Chief Darren Edwards with us from Washington Township. Darren has a very long career in the fire service as well, 35 or so years, also a former member, a fellow member of the DROP. And he's going to talk to us about another really important, relevant subject today, and that's going to be EV emergencies. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over. I believe Larry's going to get us started. This is a fairly open forum. If you have questions, we'd like to hear them. If you're thinking of it, somebody else is probably thinking it. So thank you much for your attention.
Thank you, Chief.
Absolutely.
I'd like to do a little brief resume, give you a little bit of my background, so qualify me to do what I'm doing. I started in the fire service in 1972 in what's now Crosby Township. It was New Baltimore then, and got voted in and got hazed a little bit coming in the door. In 1975, I moved up to Coleraine Township, and I was the last guy brought on to Dunlap Fire Department before the merger. And Dunlap and Groesbeck became Coleraine Township, a very, very good qualified department today. Over the years, I started hanging out with the cops and riding in the police cars and EMT. I liked that so well, I became a police officer in 1979. In 1983, I was a full-time police officer in Coleraine Township. I was their first PIO, crime prevention officer, and I really loved it. Unfortunately, in 1985, they disbanded the Coleraine Township Police Department, gave it back to the Sheriff's Department. Now, I went back to my original job, which was at Rumpke, and 6 months later, I became their first safety director. So over that span of almost 40 years at Rumpke, there was a lot of things I saw about fires in the solid waste industry, and when we brought in compressed natural gas vehicles, there were some issues with that, a little different than our diesel trucks that we had in the past, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, fast forward, as the chief said, I work for Ram Restoration based out of Dayton, Ohio, a company that's been in business for a little over 20 years. And when they interviewed me, they recruited me from another company, flew me down to Florida, and I spent the day with the owner. I listened to the man talk to employees, talk to attorneys, talk to a lot of different folks on the phone, and I really enjoyed his mannerism and communication, and what got me most was his dedication to doing the right thing. And I quickly said, this is someplace I want to go to work for. So I work out of the Florida office. It snows here, and I haven't had to shovel sunshine yet, so I love it down in Florida, but I kind of miss the hometown too. So why are we here? I don't know if you heard about the situation that happened in LA. This happened February the 15th. They were dispatched to a vehicle fire. On scene, they saw a fully involved tractor. The trailer wasn't connected to it, it's just the tractor. So they immediately deployed hand lines. As they approached the fire with hand lines, there was an explosion. It wasn't supposed to happen. So we're going to talk about size up and identification of risk a little bit later. Now, at the end of the day, when I went to LA, I didn't want to sound like a Johnny-come-lately. I didn't want to sound like a know-it-all. But in the fire service and in the police department, we learn from experiences. CNG vehicles are safe until they're not. Your gas grill on the backyard is safe until it's not. When it isn't, we get a phone call. So that's what we got to be prepared for. Lessons learned from that situation, we learned that shift change was a problem for that division. These were friends of mine. We learned that not doing a 360 is a problem. Why a 360 wasn't done, we'll never know. But the bottom line is that we had lessons learned from that. At the end of the day, that was the opening remarks that I made in LA about why we're here, lessons learned. What you're going to hear today from me is my interpretation of what I'll call best practices. Please do not go back to your department and do something that is contrary to your policies and SOP. However, if you see something here that you think should influence those policies and SOPs, please introduce that and feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions. So this is about best practices. The videos that I'm going to show you, most of them I'm just going to fast forward to them, but this one I'm going to show you in its entirety.
You're just getting some new video of that truck explosion near the port of LA that injured 9 firefighters, 2 of them critically. Take a look. That explosion result of a tank that exploded on the truck. Fox 11 Susan Hirasuna live with the very latest. Susan.
Yes, and we just finished talking with the people who gave us that new video. Vanessa told me that the shock of the blast was just so hard that it blew the kitchen door open. And her daughter told me that she was so upset by it. She went to school, but eventually she had to call her mom to bring her out and bring her home again. Here's what else happened today.
We've got multiple firefighters down.
The radio call from the scene of this massive truck blast.
Hey, we got a firefighter down. Our conscious is breathing right now.
Just before 7 a.m., the driver of this truck noticed something wasn't right, got out, and called 911. Security video appears to show her away from the truck. 10 firefighters responded. 6 minutes later, 2 explosions. the second bigger than the first and caught on this security video.
The boom is what made me shoot out of bed. I shot up real quick, and then the rumbling is what made me kind of like question everything. Like I thought it was an earthquake.
Pieces of the truck landed nearby. This piece flew more than a city block.
Oh, the sound was crazy. I thought something exploded under my house, literally.
We thought it was an earthquake, but then again, it felt like a bomb.
Yeah, Metro Fire, Life Force 38. I need you to dispatch the 5 closest fire resources and 5 paramedic rescues.
9 of the 10 responding firefighters were taken to Harbor, UCLA. 2 of them were in critical condition. From Skyfox, the remains of the firefighters' gear strewn on the street. 1 firefighter needed to be airlifted to the burn center at LA General. Even hours after the explosion, the truck smoldered and firefighters came out to test for hazardous materials, a part of their investigation.
Let's pray for those firefighters because, you know, they have families and, you know, it's sad. You know, they risk their lives for us to protect us.
All right, and the driver of the truck was not injured and is cooperating with the investigation. And you see here, the fire units are still here. Again, this is nearly 12 hours after that fire and blast. Police are also nearby. They're trying to keep people away from this area unless you actually live here. Reporting live in Wilmington, I'm Susan Hirosuna, Fox 11 News.
When that situation happened, the very next day, I got a phone call from LA Times. They interviewed me for over an hour. They contacted me because of what this department put on the internet. 2 days later, I got a phone call from Chevron Fire Department, Chevron Oil Company. They have their own fire department. They also have mutual aid agreements with neighboring departments. They called me up and asked me to come out and do my training. They pay for me to come out. I don't charge for this. They pay my expenses to come out to LA and do the training. I had multiple fire departments there, but what was really, really kind of neat, the people that are involved in investigation from that fire were at my class, and they were very appreciative. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of what I've been preaching for a while. This happened in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm going to show you some pictures a little bit later on about those units on top. So in the fire service, Chief Randy Ellert used to tell me all the time, if it can happen, it will. And there's evidence of that. They never expected something like this to happen. Here's a situation that with LNG. LNG is very different than CNG. LNG is heavier than air, therefore it stayed on the ground and it transitioned all over the place. CNG is lighter than air, it's going to dissipate quickly.
Neighborhood narrowly avoided a huge impact. What else did you learn?
I mean, it looks like on the front of the house, the siding, I mean, truck first exploded.
This happened in Chesapeake, Virginia. That house was torched. So in the solid waste industry, I've investigated a lot of vehicle fires. In the fire service, we go to a vehicle fire, put it out, and go home, call it a day. Rarely do we investigate a vehicle fire. But if you're in charge of a fleet, like these folks from Home City Ice, you have something like that happens, you want to investigate so you can prevent it in the future. So over the course of time, I've separated these kind of fires into 2 categories, a cab and chassis fire and a load fire. Cab and chassis fires happen typically because of a poor maintenance or something goes wrong, something of that nature. Load fires in a trash truck happen almost every day. Simple reason is what we put in them. If we were to take what everybody has here in your garage, squeeze it together, we're probably going to have a chemical reaction. Happens every day in a trash truck. They put the trash in the truck, it gets squeezed up in there, and so you have this chemical reaction going on creating heat. Typically, when that truck is on the way to its disposal site, it has voids in the truck. So now you have like a bellows. So at 65 miles an hour, you got fresh oxygen coming into a superheated surface with plenty of fuel, and you have spontaneous combustion. However, this one they believe was a hydraulic leak. If I take a match and drop it into a bucket of hydraulic oil, the match goes out. But if I atomize it, I'll put it in a sprayer, has a very, very low flash point. That's what they believe happened in this situation. We've all seen what happens with the hairspray and the lighter, you know, yeah, it's real. So that's what they believe happened in this situation. So the reality was, when the fire happened and the PRDs did what they were supposed to do, we'll talk about that in a minute, they released. Imagine pulling up, deploying hand lines, and this happens. And you're standing there with a hand line, just like those guys did in LA. They're standing there with hand lines. That was an explosion. This was just a release of the gas. Now, the fire department was not on scene at this time, so it torched a house that was 55 feet away from that truck. And that's important to look at again. So I went to the scene, and I went to this company. We had a long discussion. Keep in mind, I'm going to show you something a little bit later on. That house is 55 feet away from that truck.
Larry, quick question.
Yes.
Were the firefighters in LA on air fighting that fire?
It's a great question. I don't know if they were packed out. I know they had turnout gear on, but I don't know if they were packed out. The investigators and I have been talking a lot. They've told me what they're allowed to tell me so far, and we'll talk about that scenario in a minute. Great question, Chief.
This afternoon, Northside businesses are still cleaning up after a garbage truck catches fire and it
stops in the fire hardware lot when he noticed the fire about 5.
I like it when he noticed the fire. This happened in Indianapolis. First officer on the scene was told this is a compressed natural gas vehicle. He gave the order to cool the tanks to prevent the levee. Wrong situation. So imagine this. They got hand lines on both sides of the truck throwing water up onto the truck to cool the tanks. If I ask, and this is why I wanted to find the youngest firefighter, I'm going to throw him under the bus, how does the pressure relief device work? Okay, the oldest guy.
It relieves the pressure so it don't explode.
Exactly. These do not work off of pressure. They work off of temperature. That's the difference. They release at 218 degrees. Please remember that. So imagine this. Fire department's there throwing water up here, and the pressure relief devices were negated. It would not allow it to off-gas, so the garbage in the inside of the truck continued to cook until it reached a point of explosion. That's what the tank looked like after the explosion. That is a Class 4 tank, the same thing as your SCBA is. Same thing on the tanks out there in the truck that we're going to look at a little bit later on. It's a very rigid tank. I could take a D8, put it on the grass, put that tank on the grass, and run over that tank. It's not going to hurt it. But the weakest point of that tank is where? The valves, the lines coming out of it. That's the weak point of that tank.
Hundreds of feet and yards away, that's when they say the businesses around here were damaged. There was broken windows.
That school is 3/4 of a mile away from the explosion site. Now, a mile is 5,280 feet. 3/4 of that distance is a long way.
Have some sight.
That tank flew to the backyard of that school. Now let's examine this tank. On the ends, we have pressure relief devices on both ends. So imagine the fire department is throwing water up here, inadvertently cooling them, negating them from releasing and off-gassing, while that garbage is still. They weren't focused on fighting the fire, they were focused on cooling the tanks. Indianapolis, career fire department. They didn't know what they didn't know at the time.
And one of those tanks that flew off the truck, it landed in the yard of Northview Middle School. People who were working in nearby businesses say they saw the firefighters responding.
Mr. Stone, were you?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry for.
Got to use the mic.
Yeah.
And do me a favor, Mr. Stone is some old guy.
Okay, Mr. Larry.
I'm just Larry.
Okay, just Larry. If you would clarify the difference between the temperature release valve and the pressure release valve, because it seems to me that they work in conjunction, that the temperature rising increases the pressure. And so you're saying by cooling the tank, it negated the pressure relief valves. And I was wondering if you can explain better how those work in tandem or apart.
Okay. To clarify, there are no true, what we consider a pressure relief device on those tanks. There is just the PRD that releases with temperature. And I have asked the question, what would be wrong with having both? And an engineer with a lot of pencils and pocket protector gave me this explanation I couldn't understand. So the bottom line, that they only have a PRD, pressure relief device, that works off temperature. Good question. This is an example. I told you, atomated hydraulic fluid has a very low flash point. These trucks, your concrete trucks, any truck that has a hydraulic system on it that has high pressure, that's what happens. So you're going to see how rapidly that can ignite. You're going to see the hydraulic oil spray. This is called a residential front loader. You have them in your first due. They're widely used all over the country. So there's a hydraulic leak, instant ignition. The exhaust on these trucks are very, very hot. It's enough to cause that ignition. And even in a diesel truck, when they regen, that regeneration happens at about 1800 degrees. You can take a piece of paper when it's in regen, hold it up to the exhaust system, and it'll ignite. The more we know, the safer we can be. This happened in Kokomo, Indiana. I'm so thankful for YouTube, where I can find these videos. Every trash truck driver in the United States is trained, when you have a fire, to dump your load. Go to a secure location and dump the load. Why this guy didn't do it, I don't know. It only takes one wire to disable that truck, so he can't move anymore, so he's dead in the water. We know he tried to put the fire out because there's his fire extinguisher. So I told you that the pressure relief devices release at what temperature? 218 degrees. 2 blocks away with my old eyes, I can see that this truck is an alternative fuel vehicle because of this canopy up here. And as I showed you on the other tank, there are pressure relief devices on both sides. We know that a match burns at 1200 degrees, so we got a pretty good hot fire there, so it's over 218. Why didn't it release? This is Kokomo, Indiana in February. Guess what? It's cold there. So the ambient air is being pulled like this because you have a thermal lift. Anytime you have a fire, you have a thermal lift. You see when you have a campfire, you see little stuff blowing up in the air like that. That's a thermal lift. That's the only reason that these PRDs did not release in this situation. Now, we'll fast forward a little bit. So the big red truck is on the way. I've been talking for less than 10 minutes. Where's the battalion chief? If the PRDs release, you think he's in harm's way? He does what we're trained to do. He does a 360. If I'm going to do a 360 in one of these kind of fires, it's going to be at least 100 feet away. He does a walk around at least 3 times during the evolution. Police department comes up. He does a walk around with them. A couple other firefighters come up. They do the same thing. Again, Kokomo, Indiana, career department, well-trained, didn't know what they didn't know. So we'll fast forward a little bit more. So they deploy a hand line. This guy is doing what he's told to do. And you're going to see he plays with this thing for about 2 minutes and 35 seconds. It does absolutely nothing to mitigate this fire. I'm going to wait till he gets a little water on it. First off, if I happen to be the OIC in this situation, and we're coming up from the rear with my engine, and my hydrant's up there, we're going to talk about the need for a hydrant in a minute, I'm not passing that truck to get to the hydrant. It's not like, hey, roll the windows up, we'll go real fast. I'm going to stage, and I'm going to wait for another apparatus to take that hydrant to extinguish this fire. They did the right thing, in my opinion, by extinguishing with a master stream. Again, this guy plays with that hose for 2 minutes and 35 seconds, does absolutely nothing to mitigate that fire. We'll fast forward just a little bit. So for 2 minutes and 35 seconds, he does absolutely nothing. They apply a master stream. In 7 seconds, they have a knock on this fire. I can tell you, Chief Herzog will tell you that they've had a couple in Harrison that they knocked out with a master stream very, very quickly. And keep in mind what I said earlier about that trash truck that's going on the way to a disposal site. You take care of a little bit of I-74, so there's a lot of them from the city to other trucks that are using that thoroughway.
Situation, cooling it was the right thing to do?
Well, extinguishing the fire. And that's what they did with the master stream. So it wasn't about cooling the tanks, it was about extinguishing the fire. Good question. I love questions. This one happened outside of Dayton. When the fire happened, the chief Googled CNG fires. He got my name. He said, can you come up and let's talk about this? Absolutely. So let's dissect what happened here. He's on 675, 675. He's on the way to the landfill. It's at the end of his day. The firefighters had knocked this fire down 2 times, and it rekindled. Now they're out of water. 1 truck response, 500 gallons, they're out of water. So they're waiting for a tanker. While they're waiting for a tanker, they decide to walk up. What's going on here? Why is this thing rekindling? They had no clue. So after we dissected the whole process, here's our tanks up on top. From the tanks down to a distribution box, you have high-pressure stainless steel lines. When that thing is fully fueled, it fuels up at 3,600 PSI. Now we know from previous situations that when that tank gets heated up, the gas expands. If that truck sat out in the sun and doesn't use any of the fuel, it'll expand to 4,200, 4,400 PSI. The system on the high side is made to handle that. The low side, because the engine can't stand 3,600 PSI, is 150 PSI or less. There's a valve to turn the fuel supply on or off from this distribution box. Now, here's the dangerous thing. From the distribution box to the engine, it's low pressure lines. It is a rubber line with a stainless steel woven around it, a rubber line. Now, can somebody tell me what happened? The rubber line was compromised. The driver had not turned the fuel supply off, so you've got the supply side feeding that low pressure side. The rubber line was compromised, and every time they knocked the fire down, the gas would go onto superheated metal and reignite. Now, at the end of the day, you had a total catastrophic failure of the entire system. These guys were extremely lucky because this truck was at the end of its workday. When we talked to the company, we found out that more than likely the supply side had less than 150 PSI. Had that had 3,600 PSI, you see how that flame's coming out pretty aggressively, but can you imagine what it would have been like it was in Chesapeake, Virginia? And those guys standing there, when we did the training up there, their eyes were still this big.
Larry, is there a safe way to approach these vehicles? We train young firefighters to approach, a bread and butter car fire from the angles, basically from the corners. Is there, if you were going to establish a standard, is there a good way to approach these?
Great question, Chief, and let's put things into a triage in perspective. So first and foremost, we're dispatched to a car fire. You know your first due. So at the corner, walk and don't walk. We know the exposures that are there. So that's when does size up start? Dispatch. On dispatch. But as we stay en route, we get more information, then it kind of changes what we thought we were going to run into. And then when we get there, we see it's completely different. So that's the important process to me, is size up, identifying the risk. We don't know right now if it's an alternative fuel vehicle or not. But if we go up there like we've done for years and position ourselves close to that vehicle so that we can use our trash lines, you know, let's face it, that's what we do, and we approach it at a 45-degree angle. To me, you've got to be at least 100 foot out. Now you're going to make an assessment what type of fuel is fueling that vehicle. Could be gasoline, could be electric, could be LNG, could be CNG. Now, if I were king, and Mr. Knapp and I have had this conversation before, 911, what's your emergency? I have a vehicle fire at the corner, walk and don't walk. Is anybody injured? No. Is it fueled by an alternative fuel source? If we were told that on dispatch, it becomes a game changer. The second thing that happened is when police officers are educated in this situation, number one, they can take a step back and be within that 100 feet. They can identify possible exposures for us, and they can also possibly identify if that is an alternative fuel vehicle. Advise my fire department it's a CNG vehicle. Wouldn't you like to know that on arrival or on, you know, initial dispatch? So to your question, the triage is basically identifying the fuel source and the risk and water supply. Great question. Because if you're on the interstate, if you're on 74, got a 1-engine company response, how much water you got on your truck, Green? 500? Okay, you're probably going to need an alternative water supply. Are there hydrants on 74? No, I didn't think so. This happened in New Jersey, and I particularly show you this one for only one reason. She's cooking pretty good. You're going to see that column of flame on the left-hand side. You may be the officer in charge and say, oh, it's already off-gassing. That's the low-pressure side. The high-pressure side is still intact, and the fire is cooking the high-pressure side, and that happens. It blew shrapnel into, not up to, into the houses on the right-hand side of this. Again, on dispatch, if we know it's an alternative fuel vehicle, becomes a game changer, we start thinking immediately about exposures and water supply and extinguishment, if we know. Now, I talked about that house that's 55 feet away. This is in Australia. This is a bus. We know that that fire right there is a lot hotter than 218 degrees. Why the PRDs have not released yet, I have no idea. Keep in mind, they're a mechanical device. That's one of the things that LA is looking at. Why did those PRDs fail in that situation in LA? They're thinking that maybe dirt got in and compromised it, maybe. They don't know. But that's what the focus is right now on why did those PRDs fail. In this situation, when they finally open up, and it's a long time, we're going to fast forward a little bit, it can blow off gas up to 100 feet for 8 to 10 minutes, depending on how much gas fuel is in the vessel. Now imagine this is 100 feet, and that house in Chesapeake Bay was at 55 feet. Imagine the amount of flame for 8 to 10 minutes that hit that house prior to the fire department's arrival. Channel 9 did a story on this a while back, and they found a video that I've not been able to capture. Mike might be able to help me in that situation.
There are trash trucks and there are fuel gas. It's a very viable product.
Whoops.
It's for firefighters.
There.
I says, holy crap, because this...
Let me go to this one. I don't know your first due. If you have a company that has a fleet of CNG vehicles, you want to make sure you're having a communication with them about the leapfrogging effect. And I call that name because when I was in Florida in a department, we were dispatched to a vehicle fire at a RV facility. On arrival, there were 12 units involved. It had leapfrogged to each one of them. So what happened in this situation, because all these trucks are CNG fueled, One of them, PRD went off, the next one, the next one, the next one. So that once it reaches the 218 degrees, the pressure relief device opens up, and now you got a constant amount of fuel. So we're going to jump to some pictures. If you see a placard, that's what it's going to look like. And I say if you see a placard because it's not required. It's the primary fuel source for that vehicle, therefore it's not required. If they were carrying it as a commodity, you would see a DOT placard and this placard as well. We don't have a placard on our car that says powered by gasoline or diesel. It's the primary fuel source. And if this truck had one on it, would you see it? Most commercial vehicles are a rolling billboard for that company, and the only thing I can say about this one is see that canopy on the top of the truck? From 2 blocks away, I know that's an alternative fuel vehicle. This is what the tanks look like on top of the truck. If you're familiar with a cascade system, the way we used to fill air bottles, you open one at a time, fill the air bottle. Very similar, except for these valves are turned on all the time unless a truck is in for some sort of maintenance. Typically, this is what the distribution box look like. Those trucks out there are a little bit different. But on most of the trash trucks and most of the larger commercial trucks that I see, it's something similar to this. They're all going to be different. Now, this one has a nice placard on it. Keep in mind, it's not required. One winter, that thing will suffer so much road grime and dirt and everything else, it probably will not be visible. That's what the inside of it looks like. They're all different. This truck has a high side and a low pressure side. That red valve would have turned off the supply had the guys up in the Dayton market and Beaver Creek, had they known about that red valve, they could have turned it off, stopped the supply, because the driver didn't do that. And I can tell you that drivers are trained to do that. Drivers don't see fire like we do. So when they see fire, guess what? You probably catch them in the next county because they're taking off and they're getting the heck away from there.
Where's that located, the lever?
Great question. They're in different places based on the manufacturer. Majority of them that I see is on the driver's side, right outside the cab. Majority. But keep in mind, the regulations for these things are still being written. It's the best way I can answer that. This is that truck from Indy. This is very heavy gauge steel, so you can see the magnitude of that explosion. Some departments have never seen what it looks like when you dump the load. This is the city of Cincinnati. They dumped the load. Fire department put it out. Trash company come cleaned it up. No harm, no foul. You saved a $350,000 truck. When the right situation, when they can dump the load and save the truck, that's not a bad day. This is up in Trotwood area. When I did the training up there, they told me that, oh yeah, we have a CNG supply right down the road a block away. We went down to that facility. Theoretically, we could put our credit card in there right now and get gas. The difference is the hose and the receiver have a check valve system, and those check valve systems have to marry up for the gas to actually flow. So even though we could put our credit card in there, we can't flow gas. This is the city of Hamilton. This fuel was at $1.99 for 10 years that I was doing this, never changed a bit. Only after COVID did it increase. It's now $3.52. It's still $3.52. I talked to the mayor of Hamilton this weekend, and he said that they're trying to make sure that's as stable as they can possibly make it, because this is owned by the city of Hamilton. The city of Hamilton has a lot of CNG vehicles, but no fire trucks that are CNG. They do have a staff car that's CNG, but it's not allowed in the bay. This is outside of Dayton. Same thing happened. The guys were so interested, and this is a very busy fueling station. They were asking different truck drivers their questions about their system. Most of the truck drivers have about this much knowledge. Not because they're stupid, they've just not been trained to know what we need to know. You ask them where a pressure relief device is, they don't know what that is. I'm coming out of Dayton one day and I see this truck And I've told people throughout my 20 years of doing this, I don't see a mom and pop operation going to CNG because it requires you training your mechanics. Here's the biggie. It also requires you making sure that your structure is retrofitted with HVA system that will remove the air, recycle the air 100% every 10 minutes. This is important. 100% every 10 minutes. Why? The gas is lighter in there. If there's a gas leak, it's going to go up into the ceiling, it's going to bank down, and heaven forbid somebody comes in and flips a light switch. The other thing is that all the electric in there has to be explosion proof for that particular reason. So I don't see a mom and pop having CNG vehicle. I get upside and say, holy crap, it's a CNG vehicle. Who in the heck is M&M Karting? I later learned that they're a large trucking operation in Louisville, Kentucky. When I did this training after that in Sharonville, they said, oh yeah, they have a fueling station right here in Sharonville in our first due. So I asked them what the pre-plan was. More than less, it was the same thing as any gas station. At the end of the day, this has greater potential because the fuel is stored above ground. It's not underground. And the other thing I didn't see here,
Area 53.
when I went around the whole building, I didn't see a maintenance facility. Be safe.
69, 49.
I did not see a maintenance facility. So let's fast forward a little bit. This is an operation in Louisville, Kentucky. And so the truck driver calls his dispatcher and says, hey, I've got an air leak. Dispatcher says, where are you? He goes online, he finds a truck repair place. He said, well, take it over to Billy Bob's garage. He goes to Billy Bob, and Billy Bob says, oh yeah, I can fix that air leak, bring it on in the shop. Uh-oh, what's wrong with that? His shop has probably not been retrofitted for a CNG vehicle. My point is, if you have a maintenance facility in your first due, and you're responsible for inspection, you make sure that you tell that person they are not allowed to bring a CNG or alternative fuel vehicle in there like CNG or LNG. They have to work on it outside. Now, to cover your exposure, you put that in writing. Because they're not going to remember you came in and told them not to bring that vehicle in. You put it in writing that you alerted them not to bring that type of vehicle in their facility because they're not equipped. Home City Ice. This is up near Dayton. I saw that truck up there, and I'm thinking maybe it's CNG. I've never seen a compartment quite like that. So as I'm walking around the truck, I see it says diesel only. About that time, I'm taking pictures, and the guy says, can I help you? And I said, oh, I thought maybe it was CNG. And he said, oh yeah, it's CNG. What I learned was the diesel is for the engine. The CNG is for the refrigeration unit. He was quick to show me the decal. So imagine you got a cabin chassis fire, you're in front of Kroger's, you pull up, you're going to see that decal? Probably not. But I will also guarantee you, if you're at that Kroger store and you got a cabin chassis fire, guess what else is happening? How many people do you think is doing this? Hey man, look at this, really cool. You know, it happens every fire. We've seen it all the time. So when I talk about exposures, I'm not talking about just structures, I'm talking about herding the cats. And that's where law enforcement can help us when we're given that size up information en route. The more they know about it, the more they can help us in that transitional period. Hit the wrong button. This truck is a day cab. Now what do I mean when I say day cab? It doesn't have a sleeper on it. When I see that large of a tank, that's equivalent to 150 gallons of diesel. A day cab can run all day with 55, 65 gallons of fuel. When I see that large of a tank, I'm going to make the assumption, until proven different, that it's an alternative fuel vehicle. Here's a nice, pretty, pristine truck with the distribution box there. But more importantly, what I'm showing you on this one is the hydraulic lines. These are high-pressure stainless steel lines. But every place there's a clamp, there's a rubber grommet. When that rubber grommet degrades over the sun or over time or whatever, and you got metal against metal, when that thing is gearing up, you will ultimately at some point have a hydraulic leak. The management or the maintenance guys try to look for that, but they can't always find it in advance. This truck is a little different because the tanks are in the tailgate. I'm very familiar with trash trucks. You won't necessarily know that, but that inspection panel there is a signal to me that that's an alternative fuel vehicle. This particular truck, the discharge is at a 45-degree angle to the rear of the truck. These are where the vent tubes are. The solid waste industry, about 15 years ago, voluntary compliance, as opposed to what happened in Chesapeake, they now are mandating that the vent tubes are at a 45-degree angle from the rear of the truck. That is the solid waste industry. I don't know about the rest of the industry. It is not a requirement, it's not a regulation, it's something that the solid waste industry, because they know they go into residences all the time, they did voluntarily. You see this truck, you see all those panels in there, that's where all the tanks are.
You're saying it's the rear of the truck in a 45-degree angle down, so it's hitting the ground and not shooting way out?
No, it's up in the air.
Okay.
And a couple of the news medias saw some trucks on 275 that actually vented that away. I don't know which news media it was, but I heard about it. Good question. Another configuration. Again, the purpose of these different pictures is so that you can see this from a distance and recognize that it's an alternative fuel vehicle. I'm not saying CNG, because it could very well be LNG. This happened outside of Louisville. I was working for this company, and I was told we had a truck on fire. It took me about 25 minutes to get there. I took this video. She was still cooking when I got there. As I approached, the battalion chief had just given instruction to two guys to take hand lines to go up that ladder with the hand lines and stick those hand lines inside that truck. This is on the beltway around Louisville, Kentucky. I said, Chief, no disrespect, but if I can interject. He said, what you need? I told him who I was. I said, I would not want you to risk 2 firefighters' lives to save that truck. There's no exposures. We're on the interstate. He said, what's your recommendation? My recommendation is we get a tanker and a ladder here, and we put it out that way. We didn't have a ladder there. We didn't have a tanker there. We had to wait for it. But that's the way we put the fire out. There was absolutely no reason to risk firefighters' lives to go up there and put those hand lines in that truck. That truck was salvageable. We had to tow it away, obviously, but was able to be reconstructed. This happened out in California a few years ago. 12 firefighters were injured, all minor. They approached it the wrong way, all minor. That's why it's so much different than what happened in LA. This is our situation in Beaver Creek. Now I show you this truck 2 blocks away. I think we can all agree that probably, don't know for sure, it's an alternative fuel vehicle. So as I turn the corner, I see this truck. What's my first concern? Look how close that house is. You have that situation in your first due. So when I turn the corner, it's probably not so much extinguishment, it's exposure, because I probably got humans there. And again, if the law enforcement is there before you and can take charge of hurting the cats, that's a blessing for us, because we've got to engineer that fire. When I was doing this class in Las Vegas at the solid waste show one time, I had an engineer tell me, you know those things are engineered to shear off? And I said, well, okay. I said, have you ever been to Newport, Kentucky? He said, no, why? I said, they have a lot of underpasses there, and they're low hanging. These do not have a check valve system in it. If that thing shears off, you got free flowing gas. We just saw that in Louisville on one of the earlier videos. The engineer didn't have an answer for me. You see that truck? It's a pretty truck. Got the canopy up on top. Oh, it's probably a newer truck. Nope. That's a refurb truck. You're not going to know that. You cannot make the assumption, because the truck is pretty, that it's going to vent at 45-degree angle. That's a refurb truck. They did not replumb it, so it's going to vent it horizontally. I was doing this training in Atlanta, and the battalion chief said they had a fire just like that truck right there. And he had 2 guys, one guy with a hose line, the other guy with a ladder, and he went up and he turned off each one of those valves individually. I said, was the fire still active? He said, yes, sir. I cringed. He said, you wouldn't have done that? I said, no. I said, if anything, I would have had him turn off the supply, but not go up that ladder, because I don't know when that PRD is potentially going to release. And I would hate to have that human up on that ladder and it releases, because I also don't know where the vent tube is. You don't know what you don't know will kill you. Another configuration, you see that truck, and please, when you're coming back from a run or you're with your family and you start looking at these things, let the bosses know that you're seeing them. Another configuration, here's a Rumpke truck with the canopy in the back instead of being on top. Waste management truck, same situation. God love them, they got a big sign on there. You know, when we turn the corner and we see active fire, our eyes get big and our ears close up. That's why we repeat orders when given an order by a commander. I like this one here because I can see the little bitty decal on there. I see the red valve. I can see the vent tubes up here. Now let's say this guy's out on 74, cabin chassis fire. We go out and we're gonna surround and drown, more likely, right? So, not a problem, no harm, no foul, lost the truck. I'm not gonna lose any sleep over it. Let's take this same truck and he's delivering at a nursing home or a school or a high hazard building of some sort. It becomes a game changer. Hey driver, did you turn off the supply? No. Probably what you're gonna hear. In that scenario, I'm gonna have somebody fully donned out, go up and turn that red valve off, and they're gonna have a hand line, a spray on their back the whole time. Stay low, because when they explode up and out, like this. Somebody's gonna low crawl, get up there, turn that valve off, and get back. But they're gonna have a charged, active line on them the whole time. I don't wanna have time to wait to say, oh, let's turn the valve on now. No, the whole time. Now, again, as I said at the very beginning, this is what I consider to be best practices. Please do not say Stone said. This is a thinking person's job. You got to be thinking all the time. There's no cookie cutter responses. Here's a concrete truck. I have focused so much on garbage trucks. Please know that a lot of other fleets, Home City Ice, a lot of other fleets have alternative fuel vehicles. Here's UPS. Now, funny story. I don't want to throw UPS under the bus, but the driver does not fuel the truck. There's a transfer station in Indiana where two trucks meet, they switch tractors and trailers, and they go back to their respective locations. I put on my Colombo hat one day. Y'all got them CNG trucks, right? Yeah. So what do you do to catch on fire? Run like hell. That's the answer I got. I said, do you know where the pressure relief devices are? Have no idea what it is. You know where the vent tubes are? Have no idea. They don't fuel the truck, and they have very limited knowledge about the system. And at the end of the day, you're going to be lucky to find them in a crowd. Here is, went a little bit too fast there. Nice decal on the side. They do a good job of labeling it, if we can see that. This is a route truck. I know that they have some in this market, but not every market. So a route truck has got natural gas in it. It's a whole different ballgame. This is an LNG vehicle. Now, LNG is very different than CNG because it is, and she froze up on me there for some reason. It is heavier than air. It's not letting me get past that one. So we're gonna go. So the LNG is heavier than air. We saw that in the video. The tank looks the same. So from a distance, you're not going to know if that's CNG or LNG until you know. Fortunately, it's got a nice decal on it, keeping in mind the LNG is heavier than air. We saw in the earlier video, if there's a compromise there, boom. This guy's got a nice decal. Typical truck in your first due every day. Start looking for them so you know in advance. No decal. It's a CNG vehicle. So we're dispatched to an auto accident with entrapment. The vehicle is crashed up against here. Typically, somebody's going to be assigned to look for leaking fluids. In this situation, earlier in Kentucky, they told me, said, this is where you'd use your 4-gas meter. I'm going to use this meter. The gas is impregnated with mercaptan. Everybody know what mercaptan is? It's an odor agent they put in natural gas because it's colorless and odorless. So I'm going to have somebody kind of do a little sniff test, but we got entrapment. Before I do anything with my tools, I'm going to take my tarp and 2 pike poles that we use for salvage and overhauls, right? Remember how to roll them up? Probably haven't done that in a while. But I'm going to take 2 pike poles and a tarp, and I'm going to roll it up and put it right there so that if I do any kind of metal-to-metal function, cutting or anything, no spark is going to come over there and jump into that environment. Again, that is my recommendation. Do not go against your department policy procedures in these situations. But I would suggest that you bring them up. Those buses are in California. I have jokingly said California is a different state for a long time, and they laughed when I said it out there too. So we don't have this in Ohio yet. Here's an Audi. Every manufacturer has the alternative for this type of fuel. It's about $8,000 to $10,000 more. They say that over the life of the vehicle, 3 to 5 years, it pays for itself. Here's a police car, God love them, they got a decal on there. It's my last slide. It's a Volkswagen. I've been told that this has in-ship or in-tank, mid-ship pressure relief devices in there. I don't know. I don't know where the vent tube is. There's a reason I don't. I want you to find it out. I want you to Google, when you're hanging around the firehouse looking for something to do, CNG vehicles and where the vent tubes are and things of that nature. Last but not least, in closing, I had somebody tell me that, Erlanger decided, the chief said, when we come back from a vehicle fire going forward, we're going to do a tabletop exercise. What if? Any vehicle fire you come back from, do a tabletop exercise and say to yourself and your team, this is your brotherhood right here. What would we have done differently if we turned the corner and saw it with CNG? You're not going to be ready until you train. It's what the chief said at the very beginning. We've got to train, train, train. Don't wait for a command officer to tell you to do the right thing. You come back from a vehicle fire, young man, you're the newest guy here, say, hey, let's do a tabletop exercise. What would we have done differently? The only way, in my opinion, you're going to be prepared is to do that. We've all trained for a BLEVE. I can bet you. How many people in this room have seen a BLEVE? No hands go up. But you will see this in your career. Thank you very much for your time.
Question.
Yes.
Yeah. They seem to be going to this.
Seems to be going to all this alternative fuels. Is it just better gas mileage, cheaper? What's the?
It's a great question, and the reason is in Google Europe, price of gasoline. In the absence of alternative fuels for us, we would be paying about $8, $9 a gallon. So the alternative fuels are saving us money, and they're cleaning the air. So environmentally, they're safe, and they're like everything else. I don't want to make it sound like these things are bad juju. Propane grills, when they first come out, you know, people put them in this environment. They put them in the garage in the winter, don't they? So when you go to a structure fire, what else you got to worry about? Yeah. You know, so it's like everything else that we have in our lives today. You know, it's not a problem until it's a problem, as Chief Randy Ellert used to tell me all the time, until it's a problem. And then it's a big problem. Your question? Anybody else? Thank you very much. And then we'll go out and look at the trucks in a minute. What you're going to find out in this industry, CNG and alternative fuels, there's not a lot of hardcore regulations yet. You and I both know that those will come after incidents happen and require it. That's why the solid waste industry voluntarily started doing the releases at a 45-degree angle. This unit is very different, and that's what you're going to find in a lot of scenarios. It does not have a red valve. Well, it does, but it's underneath the truck. The high pressure lines here, the stainless steel lines, it also has a similar high pressure line going to the engine, but it's gated down when it goes to the engine. So the point being is, even though this is very different from what I showed you, the point is that every manufacturer is different. There's no consistency yet in this environment of alternative fuel vehicles. Any questions?
How's your diesel filling out over there?
Well, they overfilled that, but that's...
Which one is the high to the low pressure?
Well, that's not obvious here. And so the lines going to the engine up here,
There's a manual shutoff underneath.
these are also stainless steel lines here. And I'm sure they're gated down because the engine cannot take 3,600 PSI. That's what these fuel up to as well. So they're gated down at some point within the system to come into the engine. But these are stainless steel lines, unlike the ones that I talked about earlier that are rubber lines with a steel woven jacket around it. Good question.
The manual shutoff underneath, is that for your CNG?
That's for the CNG. This unit is completely different from what I'm experienced with, and because the shutoff valve is underneath and how they refuel this, it pretty much it's always on. They don't turn it off for charging the supply. We're still evolving, you know, as first responders on the right thing to do, and it's going to continue to evolve until things happen where we can adjust our responses to. But my biggest thing is going to be information on dispatch and during en route. The better information we can get in that scenario, the better we will be long term if we on size up.